They rely on single witnesses, second-hand reports, and the natural human tendency to enhance the remarkable with a touch of the impossible. They tell us something about how Himalayan cultures imagine the limits of human ability. They tell us less in hard terms about what bodies can verifiably do. Still, even stripped of levitation and telepathy, the core claim remains challenging, that disciplined mental practice can alter temperature, metabolism, and endurance in ways most of us never experience. So what is going on inside these monks' bodies? Herbert Benson himself favored an explanation rooted in known physiology. Meditation, he argued, can alter the autonomic nervous system, the network that quietly regulates heart rate, blood vessel diameter, and the balance between fight or flight and rest and digest responses. Through years of training, tummo practitioners may learn to nudge this system in unusual directions. In the cold, most of us respond automatically by constricting blood vessels near the skin, conserving heat for vital organs. Tummo adepts appear to do something different. They may deliberately dilate those vessels, flooding fingers and toes with warm blood. That would explain the dramatic temperature rises measured at the skin without requiring any violation of thermodynamics. The body isn't creating impossible amounts of heat. It's reallocating what it already produces. Some researchers also point to non-shivering thermogenesis, the body's ability to generate heat through brown adipose tissue, a metabolically active fat. In animals and in some cold-adapted humans, this system can be trained. Repeated exposure to low temperatures, combined with mental rehearsal, might enhance its activity, turning the body into a more efficient furnace. Seen this way, tummo looks less like magic and more like an elite sport. A marathon runner doesn't grow new muscles overnight. Years of training gradually rewire muscles, hormones, and even brain circuits to support endurance. A monk in a high cave may be doing something similar, but with temperature regulation instead of speed. That still leaves questions. If the warmth comes from shifting blood flow, how do practitioners avoid damage from repeated vasodilation and extreme cold? How do they balance the risk of hypothermia at the core while heating the surface? And can an untrained person, following instructions from a book or workshop, hope to achieve anything comparable? Or are these abilities reserved for those who commit to years of full-time monastic training? Skeptical physicians note that some demonstrations, like drying dozens of sheets in a single night, are rarely documented under strict controls. Factors such as starting body temperature, prior physical exertion, partial shelter from wind, or even hidden heat sources could amplify the effect. Human beings are also highly suggestible. An observer expecting miracles may unconsciously edit what they see. On the other hand, critics must also face the data that do exist. Peripheral temperature increases of 8 degrees in a cold room are not trivial. Neither are sustained drops in metabolism that rival deep sleep while the subject remains awake and alert. These findings sit at the far edge of what textbooks predict, but they do not contradict basic physics. They simply suggest that the mind's influence over the body is broader and more trainable than most of us assume. Beyond the lab, tummo hints at a larger possibility, that techniques forged for survival and spiritual practice in harsh environments might have unexpected uses elsewhere. Benson and others saw in these monks' abilities a potential toolkit for medicine. If visualization and breath control can modulate blood flow and stress hormones, perhaps adapted methods could help patients undergoing chemotherapy, living with chronic pain, or facing anxiety disorders. Focused mental training might become a complement to drugs and surgery, not a replacement, but a parallel path. Western hospitals now routinely offer mindfulness programs and relaxation training. They are distant cousins of tummo, gentler and safer, stripped of esoteric symbolism. The results, modest reductions in blood pressure, improved coping with stress, are measurable, if not miraculous. In this lineage, the Himalayan yogi and the urban patient share an insight that attention, breath, and imagery can reshape how the body feels and functions, even when it cannot change the external world. At the same time, there is a tension here. For Tibetans, tummo is not a biohack or performance stunt. It is embedded in a religious framework aimed at liberation from suffering, not mastery over cold showers. When Western science pulls the technique out of that context, something is inevitably lost. Perhaps the real mystery is not whether monks can dry sheets in the snow. It is how a practice designed to burn away illusion has become, in translation, a symbol of human potential itself. So where does that leave our file? On one side, we have strong evidence that certain meditators can alter peripheral temperature and metabolic rate in ways that push the boundaries of conventional expectations, yet remain within the known capacities of human physiology. No new organs, no supernatural fire, just a nervous system driven with exquisite discipline into unusual configurations. On the other, we have stories that stretch much further: nights on bare ice, trance march across the plains, and whispers of abilities that defy gravity and distance. These rest on weaker foundations, single observers, anecdote, legend. They tell us more about the aura that surrounds tummo than about the practice itself. We're left with two plausible readings. In the first, tummo is the ultimate demonstration of what the mind can already do. Given enough training, attention, and motivation, we can learn to access levers in our own bodies that most of us never touch. The fire is metaphorical, the miracle entirely human. In the second, tummo marks the edge of a map we haven't finished drawing. The monk's abilities fit within physics, but they point toward mechanisms we barely understand: how imagery becomes voltage, how belief becomes blood flow, how consciousness negotiates with flesh. The fire is still human, but it illuminates rooms in the house of the mind we rarely visit. Somewhere between these readings, in a cold room in the Himalayas, a cotton sheet steams and dries on a still pair of shoulders. The tape hiss fades. The measurements sit in a file. The mystery remains warm, because every mystery hides a truth. The first thing the scientists noticed was the steam. In a stone room in the Himalayan foothills, 3 Tibetan monks sat cross-legged on bare earth. The air was cold enough that you could see your breath. Cotton sheets had been soaked in icy water and draped across the monks' shoulders. Within minutes, the sheets began to dry. Within an hour, wisps of vapor curled upward into the fluorescent light. The instruments told an even stranger story. As the monks slipped into deep meditation, temperature sensors on their fingers and toes recorded rises of up to 8.3 degrees Celsius. Their heart rates slowed. Their faces remained calm. According to standard physiology, relaxed bodies should cool, not heat. Peripheral blood vessels should constrict in the cold, not open. Yet the lines on the chart climbed all the same. Tonight we open file 12-5, the inner fire, Tibetan heat yoga. We start in the thin air of the Tibetan plateau. At altitudes above 4,000 meters, winter is not a season, but an environment. Nights can plunge far below freezing. Wind grinds along the rocky slopes like sandpaper. Fuel is scarce, wood is precious, and fire is a luxury. For centuries, monks in these mountains have claimed something extraordinary, that through a practice known as tummo, inner heat, they can generate warmth from within, surviving cold that would cripple an untrained body. In Tibetan Buddhism, tummo is more than a party trick. It is part of a demanding system of esoteric yoga reserved for advanced practitioners. The goal isn't merely comfort. It's spiritual transformation, burning away ignorance, melting illusion, kindling a flame that illuminates the mind. The stories are vivid. Novice monks told to sit on a snowy ledge all night, clad only in thin cotton, while attendants wrapped them in sheets freshly lifted from icy streams. The test ends only when a monk has dried one sheet after another, sometimes dozens, using nothing but the warmth of his own body. Hermits who spend winters in caves high above the tree line, refusing wool or fur. Yogis who sit unmoving in the middle of a frozen river, snow melting in a circle around them. For generations, these stories traveled west as rumor and travelogue. Then one woman carried them into the early scientific record. Alexandra David-Neel was, by most measures, not supposed to be there. Born in Paris in 1868, she studied Sanskrit, Buddhist philosophy, and occult traditions at a time when such pursuits were decidedly not expected of European women. In the early 1900s, she went further, literally, undertaking long journeys through India, China, and the Himalayas. Eventually she slipped, disguised as a beggar, into the then forbidden city of Lhasa. Along the way, she encountered tummo. David-Neel described spending a winter in a cave at high altitude, under the guidance of Tibetan teachers. There she practiced a sequence of breathing exercises and visualizations that, she reported, allowed her to withstand intense cold with minimal clothing. She also wrote of observing monks drying wet sheets in sub-zero conditions, and of adepts able to enter a kind of trance march, covering great distances without apparent fatigue. Her accounts were detailed, but they were also singular. No independent observer confirmed all of what she saw. Later readers debated where careful observation ended and literary dramatization began. Her work remains a bridge between Himalayan legend and Western curiosity, a medium-strength piece of evidence that something unusual was happening in those caves, even if the exact boundaries are hard to trace. Western medicine at the time mostly filed her reports alongside other exotic stories from remote frontiers. Fascinating, perhaps embellished, not easily testable. That changed in the late 20th century, when a religious leader decided to invite science into the monastery. In 1950, following the Chinese invasion of Tibet, the Dalai Lama fled to India. Exiled alongside him were thousands of monks, many of them practitioners of advanced yogic disciplines. New monasteries rose in the hills of Himachal Pradesh, including a settlement at Upper Dharamshala. 3 decades later, the Dalai Lama extended an unusual invitation. Come and measure what our monks can do. Herbert Benson, a cardiologist and associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School, had already made a name for himself studying the physiological effects of meditation. He argued that certain practices could evoke a relaxation response, a measurable shift in blood pressure, heart rate, and metabolism that countered the effects of chronic stress. Tummo offered a more extreme test. If meditation could calm the body, could it also heat it? In the early 1980s, Benson and his team arrived at Upper Dharamshala with boxes of equipment, thermistors to tape to fingers and toes, monitors for heart rate and respiration, catheters to record core temperature. The monks who volunteered were no novices. They had spent years in daily practice. Some had trained in mountain caves where failure meant frostbite or worse. The setup looked more clinical than mystical. Wires trailed from bare chests to machines that ticked and hummed. A single reel-to-reel recorder turned in the corner, recording data in quiet mechanical rhythm. Despite the hardware, the monks slipped into their rituals with practiced ease. First came controlled breathing, forceful exhalations to empty the lungs, followed by deep inhalations to fill them again. Then the breath slowed, becoming subtle. Attention shifted inward. Practitioners mentally pictured a glowing lotus at the navel, each petal a flame. They visualized the syllable ram, a symbol of fire, igniting at the center of that flower, sending heat upward through an imagined channel along the spine. According to Tibetan texts, this inner fire burns away subtle obstructions, unleashing waves of bliss and clarity. According to the monitors, something very concrete was happening as well. Every 5 minutes, researchers checked the readouts. For most of the body, temperature remained stable, but at the extremities, the numbers began to rise. One monk increased the temperature of his fingers by 7.2 degrees Celsius and his toes by nearly 6 degrees. Another recorded increases as high as 8.3 degrees. In one case, peripheral temperature soared, even as heart rate decreased from 90 beats per minute to around 60 by the end of the recovery period. In earlier work with a different practitioner in Sikkim, Benson's group had documented a 64% drop in metabolic rate during meditation, the lowest ever recorded in a human subject at the time. These were not rumors in a travel diary. They were measurements taken with calibrated instruments under controlled conditions. The phenomena were repeatable with trained subjects. Whatever tummo was, it had real physiological effects. Outside the lab, the wider catalog of Himalayan yogic feats remained more elusive. Travelers spoke of lungam trance marching, where adepts trained for years to induce an altered state before setting off across the plains. Witnesses described them moving with a strange, springing gait, gaze fixed straight ahead, seemingly oblivious to their surroundings. Some were said to cover vast distances without rest, walking through day and night, as if the body had temporarily set aside its usual constraints. Others whispered about telepathy between remote monasteries, messages written on the wind, and rare masters who could levitate or hover above the ground for brief moments. When asked directly, one senior monk told a Western visitor through a translator that the sages of old had done so, leaving open the question of whether anyone alive still could, or whether it was now more legend than living practice. Compared to Benson's lab data, these stories sit on much softer ground.